The inevitability of running a weekly series on retro games is that I'd one day have to dust off my NES and play something released before 1990. The problem with NES games is that most don't have a save system of any sort, not even a password system. See, when I do these reviews, I like to actually play the game in its entirety, since one's opinion of a game can change when the complete package is experienced. NES games were originally marketed for children with clear schedules, preferably without extracurricular activities, friends, or wives, and with roughly 8 consecutive hours available to play through each and every game. And on top of that, NES games are notoriously difficult and punishing, so what would seemingly amount to 2 hours worth of content can actually stretch into a week of frustrating repetition before progress is made. In the case of Little Nemo the Dream Master, my own personal white whale, those 2 hours of content have stretched across 2 decades as I have annually tried in vain to defeat the Nightmare King. In an attempt to prepare myself for such inevitability, I decided this week to tackle something more recent, or in other words, easy. I figured a 10-year-old game on PlayStation 2 would be the perfect go-to, and since I'm still on the horror kick thanks to my recent bout with Deadly Premonition, I figured I'd have a go at Siren, a game I often hear described as one of the all-time scariest in the horror genre. But now that I've played Siren, I realize it would probably have been easier to beat a modified version of Contra that forced me to solve King's Quest puzzles during the boss fights. Before I tear into Siren with all my pent-up frustration, I will say that it is probably the scariest game I've ever played. This was a collaboration between the director of the original Silent Hill, which I would consider the scariest game I'd ever played before Siren, and Sony's Japan studio, at the time responsible for the infinitely precious Ico, or whatever you call it. These were the most competent minds in the business of creating atmosphere, and Siren delivers the thickest, most crushing atmosphere I've ever seen in a game. On the surface, it looks a lot like Silent Hill 2, but the gameplay and perspective is a different animal altogether. Where Silent Hill fits comfortably into the survival horror genre, scrounging for weapons and health against overwhelming odds, Siren is actually more of a stealth game, and introduces the ability to tune into the perspectives of your enemies. This is where I have to pull away from comparing Siren to other horror games, because the primary gimmick of Siren feels more like an evolution of Metal Gear Solid, rather than using a radar to track your enemies, which I must admit had always felt like cheating in a stealth game. Siren allows you to view the game through the eyes of the enemies, allowing you to memorize their patrol routes and sneak by when the moment is right. In some cases, you can attack your enemies, but unless you've got a gun, getting spotted means almost certain death. Siren's enemies, called Shibido, are the heart of the gameplay. As high-functioning zombies, similar to Resident Evil 4's Las Plagas, each Shibido, that's what I'm calling them now, is characterized differently. Some are farmers, some are cooks that compulsively eat their own boiled slop, and their town watch is unerringly efficient with sniping. Yes, there are zombie snipers in this. They can't actually be killed either. You can knock them out for a minute or two, but they always come back, so clearing out an area of enemies before comfortably moving on to the puzzles is never an option. In most horror games, a level of comfort is usually achievable because your enemies are mortal. Siren knows its genre better than most, in the sense that you are always in danger. What's great about the Shibido is that you have to get intimate with them, in the sense that if you don't view the world from their eyes and memorize each Shibido's precise routine, you will likely cross their paths and they will fuck your day up. But on the subject of using enemy perspectives, called sightjacking in-game, this is a mechanic that gives you an assist while simultaneously heightening tension. When sightjacking, you can hear the enemy mumbling gibberish and breathing menacingly. The scariest parts of the game occur when you've been spotted and must scramble for the nearest hiding place, and you sightjack your pursuer, desperately praying that it stops short of your location. The Shibido are truly terrifying when sidejacked. During a pursuit, growling like starving pigs under a red-tinted screen, and more often than not, they will find you. There's an overwhelming sense of relief when the Shibido don't find you and return to their routines. Siren's emotional roller coaster is truly unmatched and certainly sets a high standard for the horror genre. But where Siren is pants-shittingly scary, it's unfortunately also bed-shittingly bad. It isn't just because Siren is more difficult and punishing than your average NES game. That I could forgive, since at least Siren has a save system. It's frustrating as all hell that most of the Shibito are capable of one-hit kills, but this serves to up the tension more than it detracts from the experience. Siren has two major failures in the gameplay department, the first of which is terrible collision detection. There are countless times where you need to knock one of the Shibito out before you can safely proceed, and if you're using a melee weapon, there's a good chance you'll swing right through your target, teeing up the Shibito for an instant kill. I encountered this needless frustration all too often, usually against Shibito armed with guns. Get too close and you'll be choked to death. Move too far away and you'll be shot to death. At the exact distance you need to successfully strike the Shibito, you might as well swing at a dead air and die anyway. In a game that requires absolute perfection from the player should also require absolute perfection from the mechanics. Otherwise, the whole system is moot. The second game-breaking failure of Siren lies in its puzzles. To put it bluntly, these are the most obtuse puzzles I've ever seen in a game. Next to Siren's puzzles, even a Roberta Williams game seems logic-fueled. Point-and-click adventure games used to get away with this sort of thing all the time, but that's in part because you explored those games at your own pace, never feeling any immediate threat. In Siren, there are crosshairs constantly pointed at your head, and you're literally under the gun while struggling to compute what a kite string, a vent shaft, and a wooden cupboard have in common. Or a face towel, a tape deck, and a meat freezer. Or a garbage chute, an EEG machine, and a fluorescent light bulb. Why does this game make me search high and low for an axe that can knock a padlock off a gate when I have a perfectly good gun? If you have any idea how these things make sense, I imagine the drugs you're on are much too strong for you to enjoy video games at all, let alone Siren. I thought this sort of shit was banned after Myst and Tomb Raider allegedly ruined the adventure game market, but seeing it in a game from 2003 allows me to pin the crime on the true culprit. Bad game design! The graphics are nice, if not entirely ripped from the Silent Hill series. I guess it's not really a rip-off since Silent Hill and Siren share the same director, but the plot of a cult turning a rural town into hell was also the plot of Silent Hill, so, one-trick pony much? Also, the faces of the characters look authentic at first glance, but when these extremely Japanese faces' jaws start moving like nutcrackers and yelling in heavy British accents, it's hard to stay immersed in the subject matter. Luckily, there's a very little bit of dialogue in the game. That is, of course, unless you're on an escort mission, which Siren throws at you like the escort missions are dollar bills and you're a particularly hot stripper. Escort missions get a lot of flack, primarily because there are so few games that understand how to properly execute them. Bioshock Infinite and The Last of Us, those did it well, this doesn't. Luckily, the escort mission aspect is the least of Siren's problems. At least these escorts do what you tell them to, and your escorts generally won't get killed unless you put yourself in harm's way first. So it's closer to Resident Evil 4 in this regard than it is to the first Dead Rising, but it's still a pain in the ass, since you spend about 90% of your short life in Siren in harm's way. I'm not proud at all to admit this, but Siren is the first game I'm going to be reviewing, and I can't bring myself to finish it. I spent around 15 hours with it, constantly dying included, and ultimately decided it was too confusing and shitty for me to bother. I wasted 2 hours of my life struggling to finish a level using a character that wielded an elephant gun for the second time. I had already beaten this level, but then the game demanded I do it again in a longer and harder way, and with somebody without a gun. Then upon finally finishing it, I was desperately ready to move on to something else. But no, then the game demanded that I repeat the entire level again with a different character, a prepubescent girl with breadsticks for bones and no more armaments than a fucking flashlight. No, I told Siren, I will not play this level, and I will no longer play your shitty game.